All right, well, welcome back to Frankfurt, everybody. We're coming up. I don't know how to have. I'm taking over. All right, if everybody can take their seats here, we're bumping up toward the 11 o'clock hour, and we want to be respectful of everybody's time, not only our members, but people that have come to talk and testify. We've got a few more members coming in, and we'll have a quorum. So welcome back, and welcome to our the first meeting of the Interim Joint Committee on State Government. Madam Clerk, if you don't mind calling the roll.
Senator Chambers Armstrong. Senator Elkins. Senator Harper Angel. Senator Mays Bledsoe. Senator McDaniel. Senator Nemes.
Present.
Senator Storm. Senator Thayer. Senator Wheeler. Senator Williams. Representative Bauman.
Present.
Representative Bojanowski. Here. Representative Bowling.
Here.
Representative Branscombe.
Here.
Representative Callaway. Representative Camuel.
Present.
Representative Chester Burton.
Here.
Representative Decker.
Present.
Representative Gooch. Here. Representative Graham.
Here.
Representative Heath.
Here.
Representative Heverin.
Here.
Representative Herron. Representative Hodgson. Here. Representative Huff.
Here.
Representative Imes.
Present.
Representative Johnson.
Here.
Representative Cook.
Here.
Representative Lewis.
Here.
Representative Lockett.
Here.
Representative Maddox.
Here.
Representative Moser.
Here.
Representative Rawlings. Representative Raymond. Representative Tate. Representative Tipton. Representative Williams.
Here.
Representative Witten. Here. Representative Mills, Senator Mills.
I'm here. Okay, we have a quorum.
Bratcher's here.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
Representative Bratcher. Representative Hale.
Here.
Thank you.
She had to turn the page to get our other two co-chairs. I'm really not trying to take over here today. So. Well, thank you so much. If you've taken time to look at your agenda, you notice that our topic today it could be a controversial topic, and I just want to start the meeting off by saying, we're not here to make political speeches. We're just here to try to find out information about illegal immigration. And then we also have a second item as well. We're going to hear from Representative Heath about his House Bill 575 regarding foreign ownership of lands. So those are our two items that are on our agenda. We have got some good folks coming before us to give us some information, and I appreciate each and every person that is here today to testify and to answer questions. We're going to try to stick to our agenda here and start off with voting, and we've got the Secretary of State with us, Secretary Michael Adams, and if he'd come forward, we'll just start off with you, Mr. Secretary. And anybody else that would like to come up with you. Y'all can give your name and for the record.
Michael Adams, Secretary of State.
Very good.
Jennifer Sketchfield, Assistant Secretary of State.
Very good. Thank you so much, folks.
Thank you and good morning. Co-Chairman Mills, Bratcher, and Hale, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here today. I recognize you have many guests, so my opening comments will be brief. Kentucky continues to draw praise for the quality of its election laws and processes, and for the caliber of the people conducting our elections. That is partly because we have been thoughtful, rational, and constructive in devising improvements to our election process. It is also because we have strived to put partisan interests aside and govern by consensus. One item of election law that enjoys wide consensus is the exclusion of non-U.S. citizens from voting in U.S. elections. Federal law prohibits non-citizens from voting in federal elections like the one we'll have in November. The current version of this law was passed by wide bipartisan majorities in Congress and signed into law by President Bill Clinton. Federal law generally applies to federal elections, and it contains no prohibition on non-citizen voting in state and local elections. The Elections Clause of the United States Constitution, however, puts states primarily in charge of elections for state and local office. And Kentucky's Constitution implies, although it does not state, that non-citizens cannot vote in Kentucky's state and local elections. The General Assembly has proposed a constitutional amendment to be considered by voters in November to make this implicit prohibition explicit. Unless and until such time as this amendment becomes law, which it cannot before Election Day, the policy of my office, the State Board of Elections, and our county clerks is that non-citizens are not permitted to vote in any Kentucky election. To that end, I have good news. During my tenure in office, I have seen no evidence that non-citizens have voted or attempted to vote in our elections. But that does not mean we should not be concerned about this issue and fail to take proper precautionary measures. Every voter registration card prompts a voter to provide a Social Security number. Illegal immigrants do not get a Social Security number. In some circumstances, though, a legal immigrant can get a Social Security number if authorized to work in the U.S. by the Federal Department of Homeland Security. I think our best tool in preventing non-citizen voting is our photo ID to vote law. 18 states issue driver's licenses or ID cards to illegal immigrants. Some of those states also automatically register new license holders to vote. You can see the potential problem those policies create. Fortunately, Kentucky does neither. You can get a driver's license in Kentucky if you are a legal immigrant. So it is important that the Beshear administration's driver's licensing centers, which also can register persons to vote, exclude legal immigrants from their pitch for voter registration. Beyond avoiding doing wrong things, we should proactively do right things. In future legislation, I would support empowering the State Board of Elections to cross-reference DMV records with voter rolls to identify potentially registered legal immigrants and remove them. American elections are for American citizens. Each of us takes an oath to support the Constitution of this Commonwealth, and even now, that Constitution evinces a desire to prevent non-citizens from voting in Kentucky elections. All of us take our oath seriously. The notion of continuous improvement of our elections has stood us well and made us the envy of the country. As we seek to continuously improve our elections and make it easy to vote and hard to cheat, we should comprehensively review our laws and processes that touch indirectly on our elections. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Mr. Secretary, if we can, we're going to go ahead and have the other folks that may be talking about elections, and then we'll take all questions at the end there, if you don't mind. Thank you so much. Next is the State Board of Elections. Y'all could introduce yourselves and give your name, and I believe y'all have a PowerPoint or okay, short one. I know. Yeah.
Karen Sellers, Executive Director of the State Board of Elections.
And Taylor Brown, General Counsel for the State Board of Elections.
Very good. The floor is yours.
know how to do this, I promise.
Hopefully it's good.
There we go.
There we go.
All right. Like I said, my name is Taylor Brown. I'm the General Counsel for the State Board of Elections, and on behalf of myself, Ms. Sellers, the board, and the staff at SBE, thank you for the invitation to speak today. As this body knows, SBE is the statutorily recognized independent agency of state government that administers the election laws of the state and supervises the registration and purgation of voters. This requires working alongside our partners at SOS, the secretary being the Commonwealth's chief election official and the chair of our board, and it requires us working hand in hand with our 120 county clerks who are the boots on the ground physically administering the voting process and acting as the registrar of record for their individual counties' voter registration rolls. Now, when it comes to interacting with the public, whether that be an individual born in Jeffersontown or Juarez, the vast majority of SBE's contacts come through the voter registration process. And there are three main ways that someone registers to vote in Kentucky. Number one, that's online. Two is through a paper application. And three is as part of getting an identification document, such as a driver's license or a real ID. So online, when someone goes to elect.ky.gov and decides to register to vote, they will first be met with a welcome screen letting them know that first, they will not officially be registered to vote until their electronic application is approved by their county clerk. After acknowledging that fact, the applicant sees the screen that you see here right now. As stated on this screen, the applicant must meet all of the listed requirements to proceed with their voter registration application. The first requirement being that the applicant is a U.S. citizen. If the applicant cannot verify their citizenship, they cannot go forward with the application process because it is over and the person is not registered to vote. If the applicant lies about their citizenship status, the next screen requires all applicants to submit a social security number and a birth date. Now, if the applicant provides a fraudulent social security number to proceed, or a non-citizen who has a social security number, such as an individual authorized by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security to work in the states, if they input a valid social security number, the applicant is still required at the final stage of the application process to swear or affirm with their signature under the felony penalty of perjury that they are a U.S. citizen. Only then is the individual's registration application forwarded to the county clerk for processing. And what the county clerk gets is a pre-populated SBE 01 form, which you're looking at here, better known as the Kentucky Voter Registration Application. The SBE website has electronically filled in the blanks for the voter. The online registration process asks all of the same questions as the paper form does, including whether the applicant is a citizen of the United States. An answer of no here results in an application not approved by the county clerk's office. And again, if an applicant decides to fraudulently fill out the form, they must swear or affirm with their signature under the felony penalty of perjury that they are a U.S. citizen. So I'd like to point out here that this way that an individual may interact with SBE in the registration process, the filling out of the paper registration application is every day becoming the method that is least utilized. While people still come into the county clerk's office to fill out a paper application and voter registration drives still collect paper applications, just like most things, people have seen a clear preference or shown a clear preference for the convenience of SBE's online voter registration system. That said, SBE's online VRS portal is still only the second most utilized way to register to vote here in the Commonwealth. By far, the majority of voter registration applications are received by SBE through the Department of Transportation when people visit one of their regional offices to secure or renew an identity document, such as a real ID or a driver's license. I think we've all had the opportunity to visit an office that looks something similar to this. This is actually a photo of the regional office in Davis County. And I apologize for it being a little bit blurry up on the screen, but everyone will see some things that look familiar to them, including the monitor that the staff member is using for the whole process, the black and blue pole that contains the camera that will take your picture, and that tinier screen right in front of the applicant there, the tablet. That tablet is what's going to facilitate the process of getting the identity document for the applicant. And it's through that touchscreen they'll interact with the system. But before that screen says anything about registering to vote, an applicant must first provide proof that they are who they say they are. You'll notice here kind of in the middle at the top, left-hand side, the proof of identity heading. The only document a non-citizen can provide is a permanent resident card or a conditional permanent resident card. When an individual presents here, we'll determine what they see on that tablet later on. If an individual presents a document proving their citizenship and they are not registered to vote, that tablet will later on ask them if they would like to register. If an individual presents a document that shows they are not a citizen, they may still continue on with the process of getting their identity document, but the tablet will not ask the individual if they would like to register. In sum, the State Board of Elections cannot report any known encounters when an undocumented immigrant has successfully made it through the voter registration application process and become an active voter here in Kentucky. That is not to say that it is impossible, though. Someone could perjure themselves at the risk of a felony conviction and wind up on our rolls. This legislative session, we were given a tool to help seek such instances out in a bill co-sponsored by many of the members of this committee. House Bill 44, in part, requires that the Administrative Office of the Courts now provide SBE, the Attorney General, and the U.S. Attorney's Office a monthly list of individuals excused from jury duty for not being a U.S. citizen. If a non-citizen is found to have registered, SBE will immediately purge the registration, and law enforcement can prosecute the felony perjury and any other criminal offense that is associated with that registration. Legislation such as this helps to ensure the accuracy of our state's voter rolls, and as the agency in charge of that task, we appreciate positive reforms such as this one. With that said, Ms. Sellers, myself, and I believe the Secretary are happy to answer any questions.
Let's have Ms. Clemons is here from the Clerks, so let's have her say a few words, and then we'll have a few questions. And while she's making her way up, we're not going to be able to blister everybody with questions, the whole committee. We're going to have a couple questions, and we're going to move on to our next subject item. So, Ms. Clemons, and thank y'all for your presentation. Very good.
Good morning. I'm Tabatha Clemons, Grant County Clerk and President of the Kentucky County Clerks Association. I'm honored to be with you this morning. We appreciate our legislative partners, many of whom are in the room today. We appreciate all the work that they have taken and the time that they have spent with the county clerks to ensure that we see continuous improvement in our elections. We certainly appreciate the unanimous vote from both chambers during our last session in regards to House Bill 580, which was a great bill for us to move Kentucky's elections forward. We mirror Secretary Adams' statements about undocumented immigrants voting in Kentucky. We surveyed our members when we received the questions from this committee and asked them to respond. All of them responded saying that they have not had encounters with undocumented immigrants being successful in voting. We had one county who reported having a person show up to vote who could not produce identification, and in turn they were offered to go get identification or to have a hearing with the County Board of Elections, neither of which took place. So again, Kentucky County Clerks mirror the Secretary's statements about undocumented immigrants being able to access our voting in Kentucky, that it's not happening. The Kentucky County Clerks Association certainly looks forward to any discussions that this committee wants to bring forward, and specifically we would love to have conversations during this interim about funding for elections and how to move that forward, and additionally our continuous improvement as we go through the next legislative cycle. Thank you.
Very good. Senator Williams has a short question. You okay? Are there any questions related to voting? I think they did a very good job of covering that. Thank y'all so much for being here, and if you have to slip out, we totally understand. Next is KSP. I see the commissioner back there, I believe. Commissioner, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, sir.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Those who don't know, I'm
If you can turn your mic on, I believe.
oh, okay.
There you go.
Saw the light.
There you go.
For those of you all who don't know me, I'm Phillip Burnett Jr., Commissioner of Kentucky State Police, and thank you for having me here today. When we were requested to come here, there were some questions that that was submitted to us, and we went through to try to provide some information for that. And the reason why is it's very limited, and then what we can do in tracking interactions with undocumented immigrants. The first question that was submitted is the number of encounters your agency has with undocumented immigrants in the past 5 years. We do not have a mechanism to track any such interactions. That's not anything we can track on a citation. That's not anything we track in a case management or any type of records management. And with that, there's actually case law that we cannot request what their ethnicity is or their immigration status for motorists. So those are some things that we work with on the federal side that we don't have the ability to be able to track, to be able to provide this information to the committee here today. Also, there were any estimates or projections of encounters in the next 5 years. And currently, we do not have any type of mechanism in place to be able to track those interactions. That's, again, and going back with those limitations of what we can actually ask of motorists that we have interactions with by our troopers and officers. Now, when we do have an interaction, if it is someone that would be an undocumented immigrant, we would have to treat those just like an unlicensed driver. And we would issue a citation with what information that we had. If they were driving a vehicle, we would treat them like any other motorist. We would turn the vehicle over to someone that is a licensed driver, or if there's no one there, then we would have to impound that vehicle. Next is to what extent your agency monitors the use of government benefits and housing by undocumented immigrants. We currently do not have a mechanism to be able to do that for those benefits at this time. Now, that may be something that we would utilize if we're working some sort of criminal investigation to be able to use some information to be able to come back as far as furthering along that investigation. Also, that if we were to have an issue with identifying an undocumented immigrant, what we would do, we would reach out to our federal partners with U.S. Customs and Immigration Enforcement, as well as the U.S. Marshals, even FBI, and then other federal entities to be able to help us with maybe locating someone that has some involvement in a criminal investigation that we may have. The next question was the number of undocumented immigrants your agency has arrested. Again, unfortunately, we do not have a mechanism to be able to track that, to be able to provide that data here today. And the last one was if undocumented immigrants are arrested, how does your office process them? We would process those like we would any other interaction with someone on a traffic stop or a criminal investigation. And if it were to be a foreign national, we would be required to contact a prosecutor and ensure that their consulate is notified. One thing we do have, though, is if we were to have an interaction on the side of the roadway and they had no identification whatsoever, but this is, again, for any motorist whatsoever, we do have a few live scan fingerprint. It's called mobile ident. And what we can do, if that individual has ever been arrested before, then that we could utilize that to be able to identify them at that time and to be able to go with the proper actions going forward on a law enforcement function.
Commissioner, can you walk us through the situation like you just described, a stop on the side of the road? Can you walk us through the path of how an illegal immigrant, undocumented person, how they work their way through the legal process? Are they let go at that point on the road? Are they taken to the county jail? And can you walk us on down through that line? And at what point does their country of origin get determined, and who does that work to determine that? Does the state police do that at all, or is that totally a federal process? If you can help us understand that.
Sure. And again, just like we would process them like we would any other person interaction. If it's that they committed a traffic violation, they could be given a citation, they could be given a warning, they could be arrested, just depending on what depending on what the occurrence was.
Right.
So those are treated no different. But what we would do if it's someone that does want to, if they're known, if this would be on an arrest, this would not be on a citation, but on an arrest, and they're a foreign national, then we would contact a prosecutor, and then a prosecutor would have to contact their consulate for that particular origin.
Okay. Any other questions for the commissioner? Everybody's really quiet. Representative Gooch has a question.
Yeah. I mean, it really is disturbing to me that we can't ask someone about their status. And I think you alluded to that was federal regulations or laws. Is there anything, I mean, we pass laws all the time that are more strict than what the federal guidelines are in lots of things. Is there anything that this legislature can do so that we give you the tools to be able to attain that type of information? Because we ask the question because we're interested in those the answers to those questions. And so what can we do to help you in getting that information that we obviously feel is very essential?
Sure, and thank you for that. But on this particular topic, the federal law would supersede state law on that. So I would think that we'd have to work together on the federal side to be able to have some guidelines on how to be able to collect such information as that.
Senator Williams.
Yes. So once you've identified they're not undocumented, they're here illegally, you contact the prosecutor. Is the federal immigration or ICE contacted by them or you, or where in the process does that happen, or does it happen?
We do interact with U.S. Customs on such if we arrest someone, but as far as we don't have the responsibility to have to make that notification. We do make the prosecutors aware of that if it is an undocumented immigrant that we're dealing with.
But not necessarily ICE.
That's correct. It's not that we have to, but typically we do. Sometimes that they will respond, just depending on the arrest and the offense that we're working with, that they would respond and be able to provide assistance to us. But it's not like a cookie cutter that they do this every single time.
Thank you.
Senator Nemes.
Yes, you said you can't ask about race or their legal status. But we often hear that minorities are pulled over more often than majorities. So how do you get that? How do we get that information?
You know, there is tracking mechanisms on citations, but it's that would be the only way. You know what their actual ethnicity is, or usually that's just someone filling out on a citation. Typically, we don't ask them. It's just how that we see that when we have that interaction for the information listed on the NIBRS report or the crime report or the citation.
So the officers often, I don't know if they're required, put that down from their license or from what they see.
Yes.
Okay. Another one, you say when you stop someone, you can't ask them that, but you can give them a citation if they have no driver's license, which illegals can't have driver's license in Kentucky. Then how do you give them a citation?
We have to treat them like we would any unlicensed driver or someone that doesn't have an ID. So we take what information that we can get at that particular time and be able to turn that in.
Thank you.
One final question, just related to, we hear about drug trafficking. Drug trafficking has increased, and there's debate over why that is happening, whether it's a border issue, whether it's a customs issue, whatever. So when you make a drug arrest in the state of Kentucky, is there any documentation of the immigration status of that person, or is that passed on? I understand you say, does that get passed on to the prosecutor for the prosecutor and ICE to ask, or is there any statistics that KSP has related to drug arrests and the nationality, immigration status of that person being arrested?
We wouldn't have any stats from that. Now, that could be listed within the crime report, like in a narrative, that, if they're having a hard time identifying them or getting any identifiers to go forward with the investigation. That one thing I did fail to say a little bit ago, if we cannot identify, they have no valid ID and they are arrested, and there's in question what their identity is, what we would do, we would lodge them in the jail and it would be listed as John Doe until that we could actually positively identify that particular suspect or who's arrested for that offense.
But as a police officer, don't you think it would be it would be an interesting data point to know where drug trafficking is coming from and the immigration status of those people that are arrested within the state?
Any information any more information that you can ever obtain dealing with crime is always going to help law enforcement.
Well, I agree. Thank you so much, Commissioner, for being here and answering a few questions. We will move on to the next item.
Thank you.
And our next person to testify is Mr. Rob Sanders, and he may be able to shed some light. He's co-chair of the Kentucky Commonwealth Attorneys Association. Mr. Sanders, thank you for being here, and welcome to our committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my name is Rob Sanders. I'm the Commonwealth's attorney for the 16th Judicial Circuit, which is Kenton County. And as the chairman said, I am co-legislative chairman of the Kentucky Commonwealth Attorneys Association. I'm sorry. I apologize. I thought the light was on. Anyhow, as you've heard from the State Police Commissioner, there is very little infrastructure in terms of data collection and tracking of when we have undocumented individuals arrested in Kentucky. When I received the request to speak to this committee, I surveyed both my colleagues and as well as contacted my jailer, because there is nothing in our case management system within the office, nothing within our files, nothing that we are given by Kentucky, or not just Kentucky State Police, but any police agency that tracks an individual's citizenship status or whether they are an undocumented or documented immigrant. What I found out from my jailer is that from June 1st of 2019 to June 1st of 2024, there were 1,361 arrests of undocumented immigrants in Kenton County alone. That doesn't necessarily mean 1,361 individuals, because some people would have been arrested more than one time. They were not deported and subsequently got arrested again. Of those 1,361, 106 were picked up by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The jailers informed me that ICE has the ability to monitor the jail's software, their intake software, so that when an undocumented alien is booked into the jail, ICE can see that, and then they contact our jail if they intend to place an immigration holder on that individual. Now, in Kenton County especially, I can say that while there might only be 106, I put a lot of those folks in prison too, so there might be some that just haven't been released to ICE yet, depending on what they were arrested for. But as you can tell by the statistics, obviously well less than 10% were picked up from an immigration holder. Far and away the most common nationalities of the individuals that were arrested in Kenton County, and this wasn't even close, are Mexican and Guatemalan. In addition, we had undocumented immigrants arrested that hailed from Somalia, the United Arab Emirates, Honduras, Saudi Arabia, Uzbekistan, Venezuela, Dominican Republic, Romania, Ecuador, Colombia, India, Nicaragua, Brazil, El Salvador, Ethiopia, Micronesia, Israel, Haiti, Germany, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Buddha, Burma, Pakistan, Zimbabwe, Uganda, Cuba, Gabon, China, Senegal, Mauritania, and Nigeria. So obviously this is not solely a Mexico and Guatemala problem. We have undocumented individuals from all over the world. This lack of tracking presents a particularly difficult problem when it comes to an undocumented immigrant who has committed a very serious offense, because if they have not been previously arrested, like the commissioner said, they can be tracked by their fingerprints no matter what name they're using. But if they've never been arrested in the United States before, it's very difficult to put out arrest warrants for someone who we have no authentication of their identity in the first place. And oftentimes they will use different names or aliases when they move from location to location. So if you put out a warrant for this person, we don't have fingerprints for them. If they get arrested in another part of the country, they're going to have no idea who they're dealing with, or the fact that they're wanted for a very serious offense back in Kenton County. We also have problems with victims, undocumented victims. They are obviously a target for criminals to prey upon. The victims, when they're undocumented, can be hard to find and are oftentimes easily scared off into fleeing to other parts of the country by defense attorneys who suggest to them that if they stick around and participate in the criminal justice process, that they will somehow be deported as well. When in fact, when you're a victim, there is a means of obtaining legal status in the U.S. if we need the victim or witness's participation in the prosecution in order to successfully convict the criminal. And obviously, we have no access to someone's prior criminal history. If they are an undocumented individual, we have no access to the criminal histories from whatever country they come from. So the only criminal histories that we have access to are what they have done while they are in the United States. Most importantly, we get no notification at all when we are dealing with an undocumented individual. That's not something that triggers a form or an email or anything like that. Usually the only time prosecutor is notified that we are dealing with an undocumented individual as a defendant is when we learn that there is an immigrations and customs holder or an ICE holder on the person, which prohibits them from being released on bond. But as you can tell from those numbers I quoted earlier, when that's less than 10% of the people, of the undocumented folks getting arrested, get one of those immigration holders, it's very, very few people that we get notice of. That's really all I have prepared for you today, other than to say that my colleagues and I all pretty much shared the same opinion and stories about the lack of any notification or any stats or anything like that when it comes to tracking the prosecution of undocumented individuals, and we would certainly welcome a legislative solution to help fix that and to help have more data for you all the next time we appear in front of you, so that we can give you all opinions that will help you make better informed decisions.
Very good. Got a couple questions. I've got one question. So do you have any idea what triggers that, what you referred to as an immigration holder, the 106 that are held by ICE? Do you have any idea what triggers that at all?
Senator, I wish I did. sometimes I think it just depends on who happens to be working the computer terminal that day at Immigrations and Customs enforcement, because in my experience, violent offenses will usually get someone deported. That means they will usually get that immigration holder. But of course, violent offenses, we're usually sending them to prison first. So they are not being released to that holder until they complete their prison sentence. Drug offenses sometimes there's no rhyme or reason. Like, I'll have felony charges on somebody and they'll put an ICE holder on them because they have misdemeanor drug offenses going with those felony offenses. But if it's a property crime or something like that, and we drop the misdemeanor along the way because we were already convicting them of a felony, then they'll drop the immigration holder on them. That for some reason, drug offenses get the attention of immigration officials probably as much as violent offenses, but property crimes generally do not.
Is your office able to ask a question about country of origin or immigration status?
I don't know of anything that prevents us from doing that, but generally speaking, that's not common practice. And that's not exclusive to my office. I think that's pretty much statewide, that no one inquires about immigration status. If anything, it's sometimes brought to our attention by defense attorneys saying, hey, if you'll just let this guy to plead to this, he's got an immigration holder, he's going to get deported anyway, so cut him a deal and get rid of him.
Yeah. Representative Maddox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Commonwealth Attorney Sanders. We appreciate you being here today and providing testimony. I have a question that has been asked of me recurrently in Northern Kentucky that I've not had an answer for, and you'll have to forgive me for asking a question that you may only be able to provide an anecdotal response to. But that said, I've had a myriad of folks inquire about whether or not local governments in Northern Kentucky have any way of tracking immigrants that may be brought to our area by way of bus or by airplane. And obviously you're coming at this from the law enforcement side of it, so you may not have any additional knowledge there, but it is a question that has been brought about, and I'm hearing in previous testimony today that that's kind of a question that can't be asked of folks as far as their citizenship, so forth, so on, in different circumstances. But are you aware of any of that type of activity in Northern Kentucky?
Well, first, let me address the issue the commissioner brought up as it relates to law enforcement officers asking that question. I believe he's referring to on the side of the road during a traffic stop. But obviously, if a individual is arrested, whether it's a motorist or not, when they get to the jails are definitely asking them where they're from, whether or not they're a citizen, that sort of thing. So I don't know that it can be tracked in a traffic stop where someone is not arrested, but it can definitely be tracked when there is an arrest. The data from those arrests is not being shared, to my knowledge, with anyone other than Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. So the prosecutor's not getting an automatic notice. Obviously, legislators, no one else, judges, I don't think are noticed or anything like that. I am not aware of any buses that have arrived full of undocumented immigrants or anything of that nature. But I don't, to my knowledge, there's no way that a local government, whether it be law enforcement or city council or anyone, would be notified if a bus full of illegals were to arrive. If they were to unload and disperse into the community without drawing the attention of law enforcement, I don't know how we would ever know.
That answers my question perfectly. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, our final question of law enforcement is Representative Hodgson.
This is really more of a technology question, but you mentioned that once you've booked someone into jail that ICE can see that. Are they looking into a state system, or are we making entries into a federal system?
That I don't know. I apologize, I don't have a better answer for you, but that would probably be a question better posed to the Jailers Association.
Okay, thank you.
All righty. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Senator.
Next up is Department of Medicaid Services, Commissioner Lisa Lee. And thank you for being here. We got about maybe 10 or 15 minutes for your section if we have extra questions, and you've got a short presentation as well.
Yes, I do. Good morning. I'm Lisa Lee. I'm the Commissioner for the Department for Medicaid Services. Thank you for inviting me here today to provide a little bit of information about Medicaid and undocumented individuals. So healthcare for undocumented individuals, there are certain federal regulations,
If you can
rules.
pull that microphone just forward to you. There you go.
Sorry.
There you go.
So there are certain federal regulations that govern healthcare for undocumented individuals. First and foremost is the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Act of 1996 that basically states that undocumented immigrants can access emergency Medicaid. They cannot enroll in and receive routine benefits for Medicaid or the Children's Health Insurance Program. There is also the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, which is EMTALA, that ensures all patients, regardless of citizenship or immigration, have access to emergency medical treatment. And the purpose, of course, of EMTALA is to ensure all hospitals, both Medicare and Medicaid participating, do not turn away individuals who need life-saving care. And typically, those hospitals can receive payment through emergency Medicaid. There's also 42 CFR, which is the Code of Federal Regulations, subsection 440.255, that covers documented and documented individuals. So individuals who have been granted temporary resident status can receive emergency services. They also can receive services for pregnant women, including routine prenatal care, labor, and delivery. For individuals who are not documented and are covered under this section of 42 CFR, they are not allowed to receive any Medicaid services except for emergency services. And you'll notice that for undocumented, the pregnancy and postpartum is not included in this section. However, labor and delivery is considered emergency Medicaid, and those individuals can receive emergency Medicaid for labor and delivery. And undocumented individuals, as outlined in the federal regulations, are ineligible to enroll in Medicaid or CHIP or purchase coverage through the Affordable Care Act marketplace. Medicaid payments for emergency services are made on behalf of individuals who are otherwise eligible for Medicaid but for their immigration status. So what this means is that if an individual meets all technical eligibility requirements for Medicaid, but they are not a legally residing resident, they cannot enroll in Medicaid. But they still have to meet all other documentation and requirements for emergency Medicaid, including in the federal poverty level status for their application. So Medicaid would cover, for example, an undocumented immigrant who meets all of the emergency Medicaid criteria up to only 138% of the federal poverty level, nothing above that poverty level. There are some groups, such as refugees or asylees, that are generally eligible for Medicaid for up to 7 years. In the event that an individual enrolls in Medicaid for emergency medical services, the federal government does provide 70% of the federal match for the services. This just talks about the enrollment process, which is very familiar or very similar to the general enrollment process for Medicaid, except for if you look at the fourth bullet, the application process is the same, except we have to have a written statement from a licensed physician explaining the emergency condition, date of emergency. Eligibility is typically granted for 2 months, or once the emergency is resolved, the coverage for Medicaid ends. Individuals are enrolled in our fee-for-service benefit in Medicaid. They are not enrolled in one of our 6 managed care organizations. This is some spend and enrollment for emergency Medicaid since 2016. As you can see, the number of undocumented count per year, the total claims paid, the average per member, and then the federal share and the state share of those costs. The undocumented member count represents less than 1% of the total Medicaid enrolled population, and the total claims paid represents less than 1% of the total Medicaid budget. The most common diagnosis codes for undocumented individuals is labor and delivery, end-stage renal disease, kidney failure, sepsis, and as of 2020, beginning in 2020, COVID-19. So thank you, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Very good. A couple questions from myself. So when an illegal immigrant comes to the hospital in emergency situations, obviously they're asking their status at some point, right? Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so these numbers came from Medicaid vouchers that the state has paid, correct?
We came from actual claims paid, yes, sir.
Okay. And then my second question is, if an illegal immigrant comes to the U.S. and has a child, how quickly is that child available? Is Medicaid available for that child, and how do they go through that process?
Children are included in that undocumented. Children still have to meet the eligibility requirement. So, if a pregnant woman delivers in the hospital, that child is deemed eligible for Medicaid, but only if they're born here. If they're not born here, they're subject to the same emergency Medicaid requirements.
Correct. So if they're born here, does their birth automatically trigger a Medicaid application by the hospital?
It will trigger a Medicaid application. That child will be enrolled in Medicaid.
Okay.
And that's only if that undocumented individual is receiving emergency Medicaid at the time.
Right. Okay. All right. Representative Hodgins.
Yes, my understanding is that under the Federal Help America Vote Act, or HAVA, that social service agencies are required to ask people if they want to register to vote at the time they're applying for social services. If your agency does that, how do you verify their citizenship status before making that offer?
Well, Kentucky has a integrated eligibility and enrollment system. We have one of the finest in the nation, as a matter of fact. And our eligibility and enrollment system can verify. We have access to various documentation, so we can verify on our application process and through our IT system that an individual is actually a legally residing individual.
So if someone is not a legally residing individual, they're not offered the opportunity to register to vote?
Not on our application. They can't complete a Medicaid application, if they're not a legally residing individual in the state.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could we go back to the slide where you show the number of
claims?
Is that statewide? There's for 3,000 for the entire state? Is that correct?
The graph.
Yes, this is the entire state.
So, a follow-up if I can.
Sure. Go.
Is there any way to track how many, if an individual is using the emergency hospital system for just as a repeat service, where they're basically using the emergency room as their regular doctor?
We could drill down into that information. Based on certain factors. It may be a little bit difficult to get because these individuals do not have a social security number, but we do assign everyone a Medicaid ID. And just for going into the emergency room, for example, if there's an accident, it really doesn't constitute an emergency because there are certain factors that have to be met, and it has to place the individual's health in serious jeopardy, impairment, or serious dysfunction, and they have to meet other requirements. So just, for example, an accident, you cut your leg or whatever, that's not going to constitute a true emergency at that time. It's something that is going to place their life in jeopardy or danger if it's not treated.
But if they show up at the emergency room with a cut leg, they're still not going to be denied service. Is that correct?
They cannot be denied service at the hospital. That's correct.
Okay.
But that wouldn't necessarily mean that they could enroll in Medicaid because we have to have a signed doctor's note and there are other criteria that need to be met.
So really, that's the individual hospital or whatever the medical facility is they're showing up at. That burden's on them, not necessarily the Medicaid system.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. One final question. So is your agency under any federal or state mandate to count or report any of these undocumented member counts as you pay a claim, emergency claim? Does that have to be reported to any federal agency?
We report to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services because they do pay approximately 75% of Medicaid claims. But I would have to go back and double check if we actually break out the undocumented. We just submit a pretty extensive report to them, but I'm not sure if the undocumented are broken out in that report.
We're not. Okay. Any other questions? Thank you so much for being here. And our final person to testify is Matthew Courtney. There he is, coming from the back. Welcome, Mr. Courtney, and he will be answering a few questions and giving us a presentation from the Department of Education related to. You have a question for them? Oh, okay. Here. Yes, sir. The floor is yours.
Thank you and good morning. My name is Matthew Courtney. I'm the policy advisor to the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support at the Kentucky Department of Education. Thank you for inviting us here today to talk about immigrant education. The original request we received had 3 data points, and I just want to review them briefly because I'm not going to be able to address them exactly the way that they were requested. You asked for an estimated number of undocumented immigrants that attend or are enrolled in primary schools, secondary schools, or post-secondary. You asked for estimates for projections of the number of undocumented immigrants participating in these programs in the next 5 years, as well as the cost to the state for providing this education. I'm unable to provide any information related to post-secondary education today because the Kentucky Department of Education does not manage post-secondary information, only through P through 12. So you'll be able to get that information from the Counsel for Post-Secondary Education. I'm also unable to speak directly to undocumented immigrants today due to Plyler v. Doe, which is a 1987 Supreme Court decision that ruled that public schools in the United States are public service available to all students who meet the local residency requirements. And as a result of this ruling, the U.S. Department of Education has instructed schools not to inquire about citizenship status when enrolling students, as citizenship status is not deemed a relevant part of determining residency in order to enroll that student. So we have no data collection related to whether or not a student is documented or undocumented. We do have some information related to the number of total immigrant and English learner students here in the Commonwealth. It's important to note that these categories are very broad categories and capture a variety of different subcategories. So immigrant students shown in these counts on the screen here could be documented or undocumented. They could be refugee students. They could be asylees. They could also be here if their families are on temporary work visas. Maybe they're teaching for a semester at UK or working on a research project and they've brought their children over with them for that. Those students would also be included in this count. Immigrant and English learner also are distinct identifications. They are often related. They travel together because of the way the federal government tracks this information. So we usually don't talk about one without talking about the other. But they are not exclusive. So not all immigrants are English learners. Not all English learners are immigrants. What you can see here on the screen is that the counts of both English learner and immigrant students have increased steadily over the last few years. We anticipate that those numbers will continue to increase. You asked us for projections over 5 years. We don't have enough data to provide that, and we don't have a standardized projection method for this work. So what we've done here is just provided a simple statistical projection for what we anticipate we will see next year. There are a number of different models for how we could have derived that. So we've included some notes here on the slide for folks who are watching and want to check those numbers. You also asked us about financial information for this group. All schools with immigrant and English learner students receive a Title III allocation. That is a federal allocation that comes to the Commonwealth. We set aside somewhere between 3 and 5% of that allocation every year to serve immigrant students and provide extra services for those. We like to talk about those as really a bridge program. Our staff usually call them the cherry on top of all of the different programs that are available to help students. Because it is so small, we look at all the other funding mechanisms first, and then if a student needs additional services beyond what the school can provide through other funding streams, then they tap into this immigrant state set aside. So that is the information I have for you today, and I'm happy to provide any other information or respond to questions to the best of my ability.
I guess the one question I would ask is, so it's safe to say that that English learners, that category English learners, costs school systems a substantial amount of money to service them and to educate them. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. English learner figures continue to grow across the Commonwealth, and the costs of related services also continue to increase. There are 167 unique languages spoken in Kentucky Public Schools, so things like translation services are very expensive, especially for very nuanced and rare languages, local dialects, things like that, where we have to really look for partners who can do that. So yeah, it's very expensive. We do receive around $5 million is kind of where we're running right now from the federal government to help support that. But there's certainly need and room for growth there.
How is that money dispersed through the school systems throughout the state?
Yeah, it's a per pupil amount. It depends on how many students are in that school who need these services.
Okay, all right. Okay. Oh, Representative Bojanowski has a question.
Yes, thank you. So I'm a teacher, and I was in a professional development last week to help me understand how to better serve and support multilingual students. And we had a lot of discussions about the access test, which measures the progress that a student has in learning English. And it's my understanding that students are tested in our state accountability tests. They're not tested the first year, but they are required to test subsequent years. And my question is, how many years does it generally take, on average, a student to get to a level of mastery of English where it's reasonable to have their scores count? I know Jefferson County has about 20% of our students are multilingual students. And when there's so much emphasis on test scores, I want to understand how reasonable it is to have a student after 1 year. They may have come into the country on a asylum visa of some sort and never have been in school before. Mm-hmm. And yet we're having these students take these tests, and then we're being held accountable for their achievement. How reasonable is it to use these tests after year one? And how many years would you think would be a better number?
Sure. So I don't know that I can speak to reasonableness. That's more of a subjective measure. What I can say is that the 1 year delay in testing is a federal rule. And so that's where that comes from. We can certainly provide, I don't have access right now to the information about how long it takes for kids to exit that status, but we can certainly get that information to you and provide that to staff. Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, sir. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your PowerPoint and the information that you brought to us today.
Thank you.
All right, we will shift gears and we'll let Representative Heath come down into the dais and talk to us about foreign-owned property. Okay, and Co-Chair Hale is coming with him as well. We've got maybe about 15 minutes, and then we'll have a few questions for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Richard Heath, House District 2, which represents Olive Graves County, part of McCracken County.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative David Hale represents the 74th Legislative District. Thank you.
Floor is yours.
Thank you. And since I can't see the clock behind me, I'm actually going to set my timer to respect you guys' time. And let me just say that Chairman Hale and I have worked on this bill together. Some of you guys may remember from 2023 that still trying to get my clock set here. Hang on just a second. So House Bill 500 was introduced in 2023, and that bill would have prohibited countries on a federal list. Some of those include China and Cuba, Russia, Venezuela, others, but countries that were considered hostile to America, countries that the U.S. would not sell arms or weapons to. So that was the list of countries that would be prohibited from buying Kentucky farmland. The bill made it through the House. It came to the Senate really late in the session, just before we left for the governor's veto period. And it did get assigned to the Senate Ag Committee I got a couple of readings, but the clock just ran out. As it turned out, it was probably just as well. The bill needed some more work. And Chairman Hale and I worked over the interim and right up into session to bring the bill back with many modifications. So we passed the bill out of State House Government Committee, and then people started coming out of the woodwork with concerns about the bill, and rightfully so. It was pretty cumbersome and had some far-reaching tentacles, and we spent a lot of time trying to, get people on board and make sure we had a bill that hopefully would be stand a trial. As we got late in the session, it became clear to me that we were going to have to rein the bill in. And I met with the working group and said, let's try a different approach. Let's bring this thing down to something much more simple. We ended up with a 4-page bill, and let's try to get at least a skeleton in place that we can work on in future sessions. Let's at least make our legislative intent known, so that anybody who wants to know where Kentucky stands on foreign countries coming in and buying Kentucky farmland will know. And that was the bill that we got passed out of the House. Even as it came out of the House, I had one more individual come to me with a concern. So when it came to Senate Ag Committee, I asked Chairman Howe to put a Senate committee sub on there to address that one more concern. The bill, to the Senate's credit, passed Senate Ag Committee on the consent calendar and came back to the House for concurrence or non-concurrence. We left for the veto period, and we come back, and as you know, those last 2 days can be hectic. The bill is sitting in the House, waiting to be brought up for concurrence or non-concurrence, and it was never brought up. I'm not going to try to speculate as to why. I have to assume that House leadership had information that I did not have, and they had their reasons. So I think Chairman Hale is going to pick the bill up, work with House leadership, work with other members that have an interest in this, and try again next year. If you allow me, I want to I don't know if you have a copy of the bill or not, but I want to kind of walk you through some of the changes that we made that stuck. One of the changes on page 1 in section 1, item 3, was a grandfather clause. We have businesses here in Kentucky now that are owned by foreign investors, and some of them are on that list, or at least one country is on that list. And they're employing Kentuckians and Americans to work in those factories and those jobs. So we didn't want to ask someone here acting in good faith to leave. So we had a grandfather clause in there to address that issue. And then we had another issue in my end of the state. A paper mill that was started 30 years ago went out of business, lost several really good paying jobs. China bought the mill, repurposed it, and reopened it, and hired locals, good paying jobs again. Turned it into a cardboard manufacturing facility, cardboard for making boxes. Well, the question came to me about what if, since we had language in the bill that you couldn't own Kentucky farmland or you couldn't expand, the question came, what if that paper mill wants to expand, and the only way that it can expand is purchase the farmland around the existing paper mill? So we added some language that would permit that to happen. And then we had a situation in Arkansas that developed over the last year where a well-known research group, Syngenta, started out as an American-owned company, and China bought it. They do research on all types of crops, especially corn and soybeans. If you've ever been to the Farm Machinery Show and the National Championship Tractor Pool, you'll notice that Syngenta is a large sponsor of the tractor pull. Again, employs Americans, and the research they do benefits American farmers. And we felt it was unfortunate that that was lost, that company. So we had an exception in the bill to allow for a 350-acre research farm. We would have liked to have seen Syngenta come to Kentucky. Don't know that that's going to happen. It hasn't happened as of yet. Syngenta also owns a facility in Murray, Kentucky, and they do research on, let's say, auto steer tractors and sprayers, and I guess when they take soil tests, they can do grids, gridding in the farms, and variable rate spreading of fertilizer and lime and spray. So there's a lot going on in that place. Again, China owned through Syngenta, but employing local Kentuckians. Then we had another situation come up, and this was the Senate committee sub that came really late. And I'll use my district. Graves County has a 2,000-acre mega site, one of the few left in the state. And here's the question that was proposed to me. They said, let's just assume that, without getting political, we're just doing assumptions. Let's just assume, for purposes of this illustration, assume President Trump gets reelected and is President Trump again. And he puts a tariff on a country for bringing cars into America, whether they're electric cars or non-electric. And let's say that company wants to buy that 2,000-acre mega site and build a factory on it to build the cars here so that they can get around the tariffs, which is a reasonable assumption. And I said, well, the bill doesn't apply to commercial sites, industrial sites, it's just farmland. And it was pointed out to me, and rightfully so, that Graves County does not have zoning. So all of Graves County is farmland, unless it's already been developed into a commercial site. And then there was another gentleman on the call from another county in the eastern part of the state that said, well, our county is the same way. Our county doesn't have zoning. So they wanted some protection. And I lifted this language from South Dakota's bill that said if a country wants to buy land and develop it for commercial purposes, a factory, they have 5 years to do that. And if they don't do that, then the land has to be sold. And we put a process in place for all that to happen. So with that being said, that's how we ended up at the very end of the session, sitting just at the goal line, but not quite making it across. And look forward to Senator Hale, Chairman Hale, bringing this bill back next year. I want to share that there are, as of March 15th, there were 19 states in the United States that have passed similar legislation, Tennessee being one of those that borders us, Missouri being another one. And then also wanted to just mention to this group, I think you would find this interesting. I received a phone call about 10 days ago, a week ago Saturday, and this individual works for a company nationwide that is involved in acquiring property and right-of-ways, and they have access to information that probably you and I don't have. This individual's a longtime friend of mine, close to my age, very respected, and he brought up China buying Kentucky farmland. And he said, I have it from a good source that they are in the process of trying to buy farmland near Fort Campbell on Kentucky's southern border. Since Tennessee has passed legislation, that makes Kentucky an easy target because we haven't passed legislation yet. So through my research to get the bill going, I found out that the federal government has agencies in place. One of those is called Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S., and I got this information from my U.S. Congressman, Congressman Comer. So I reached out to his office, to the individual that I had contact with that sent me this information, and I gave them the information that I had received. Another one of my colleagues reached out to Senator Guthrie. And then another one is going to reach out to Senator Barr. And then I've also heard back from Homeland Security, and they are checking into it. So even without a state law in place, there is something on the federal level that if a country on this list buys property, doesn't have to be just farmland, but buys property near critical infrastructure, then the feds can step in and take control. The individual from Homeland Security that I was talking to, he said, well, I was following your bill really close because states can move much quicker than feds can. And I was hoping your bill would make it into law. And I said, well, give us another session and I think we can make that happen, or they can make that happen. So that's kind of how we arrived at the point that we're at today, and I can hold up there and take questions if you'd like.
Any questions of Representative Heath? I know we've talked about this issue some, and I wanted to give it just a little highlight during the interim so we can make sure that this bill gets back on our agenda for next session. Co-Chair Hale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to add very briefly to what Representative Heath stated there, I was his primary co-sponsor on this bill last year, and we had many other sponsors as well. Representative Heath spent a lot more time on it than I did, but we both spent a lot of hours speaking to people from other states, meeting with people, doing a lot of Zoom meetings and things of that nature with different folks. And again, at the end, I thought we was going to be able to progress this bill across the finish line. One of the things that Representative Heath did not mention there was, of all the states that have passed this, there have been states both that have been led by Democratic legislatures and Republican legislatures. So it's not really a red-blue issue here. It's an issue of safety in our country and to our state. So as Representative Heath said, I have full intention of picking this bill up, starting already in the interim here and getting this prepared, and hope to hit the ground running on this piece of legislation when we are back here in January. Again, I want to thank Representative Heath for his tireless work on this. I think it is a very common sense piece of legislation that we as Kentucky certainly need to look at, and hopefully this year we can move this bill. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to sit here today with Representative Heath.
Very good. If there are no other questions, I want you to look at your agenda real quick. Our next scheduled meeting is on a Monday, July 29th, because of some conferences that are in July. So Monday, July 29th.
Mr. Chair, could I say one more thing?
Yes, you can.
I know the next meeting that we are having is on that July date. I will be chairing that meeting, and I wanted to just mention, especially to the House members here, if any of the members here or you know of other members that would have specific pieces of legislation in mind that you think might run through the State Government Committee, please contact me, and I would love to give you the opportunity. Actually, one of the representatives from the minority party has already contacted me, and I'm going to bring him to this committee in our next meeting and let him speak on a piece of his legislation. So anybody that would have anything, please contact me. I'd like to give you that opportunity. Thank you very much.
We stand adjourned.